Hello, everyone, and welcome back to season 4 of the SPEMA Council podcast. We hope you had a great holiday break, a little bit of time off school, spent some time with your family. But we're back. We're starting off 2023 pretty strong, and we'll get right into it. So, once again, my name's Madeline Grossi. I'm one of your co-hosts for the season, as well as the podcast administrator. Joining me again on the co-hosting side, we have Jackson Pretley, our producer, and today we have Antonio as our guest, and I'm going to throw it over to Jackson to introduce him.
Thank you, Madeline. So Antonio is a recent graduate from Concordia University. He graduated in 2022 with a BA in Parks, Recreation, and Leisure Studies. After graduating from Champlain College, St. Lambert in 2019 with a DEC in sport marketing and management as well. Additionally, Antonio has worked for the Montreal Canadiens for the past 6 years in both learn-to-play programs and youth hockey development. We welcome Antonio as our 11th guest here on the SPEMA Council podcast.
Thanks for having us. So yeah, you touched on a little bit of what I've been up to. Similar to what you guys are studying at Brock, I had the opportunity to study in the sport marketing and management program in our CJEP system here in Quebec. As you probably know, it's a fantastic program where you get a lot of life skills about being within the industry, and that's kind of what started the whole snowball effect of getting involved in the industry and building up my experience. When I was in my second year, actually, I had a great professor who would constantly talk to us about reaching out to people and looking for ways to get involved. So that's what I did. And, at just 18, I reached out to, a guy who's now my boss with the Canadiens. And I told him that I was looking for an opportunity to get involved and work, just because I had participated in so many of the youth camps when I was a kid. So I always knew it was something that I wanted to do in the future. And it's funny, I just reached out to him. I found him on Facebook Messenger. I reached out. It wasn't even like super professional by email or anything. I just obviously checked the spelling and all that stuff and made sure that I didn't make a fool of myself when I was reaching out. And what's interesting too about that is at first I was rejected simply because they just didn't have any openings for positions. They had a full staff. But a couple months later, something opened up. He, I guess, remembered the message that I had sent him. He reached out to me, and I've been there ever since for about 6 years now, and it's been a dream come true.
Yeah, I'll let Jackson start here, but just to lay the ground, big Leafs fan, so we already have a little bit of a rivalry. And if my dad watches this, he'll also have a little bit of a rival.
Well, there's Leafs, Wings, and Habs in this recording, so we have both varieties.
That's all right though, because my entire life I was actually like, I really liked the Red Wings, understandably so. Like growing up, they were really good,
Yeah.
right? My favorite player of all time is Pavel Datsyuk. So, I mean, yeah, I've watched a lot of the Wings, not so much of the Leafs, but it's all right.
No, so you did touch on that you're Montreal Canadiens. Could you start off by telling us more about your current role and experience with the Montreal Canadiens organization?
For sure. So currently, I work as a contractor for the youth hockey development programs. That has been my role ever since I've been there. And what we do is essentially run camps, we run clinics, we run festivals, whether it's at the Bell Center where the team plays or where they practice off the island of Montreal. And we typically work with kids between the ages of 5 to 13, 14 years old, both at the very recreational and elite levels. I've had my fair share of dealing with players that are simply just beginners taking their first steps on the ice, and some players that at 12 years old are unbelievable talents that have very bright futures. So, I mean, we run a hockey school in the summer. It's like a typical day camp, but it's very focused on hockey, and you have the perks of being surrounded by the facilities that the Canadiens practice in. You get an opportunity to visit the team dressing room, the press conference room. You get to see a lot of the ins and outs of what the players would see on a daily basis. Not everything, obviously, because there's certain areas that you can't go into. But we try our best to provide a really cool experience for the kids, because for a lot of them, it may be the one and only time that they get to experience it. We have a lot of internationals and people that make a trip even from very west of Canada to participate. We've had kids from Finland and Belgium and France. So, our brand travels really well, and year after year we get a lot of the same people coming back, or friends that will hear positive things, and they'll join as well. And then some of the bigger events that we run, we have our Tim Hortons mini one-on-one competition, which is essentially a shootout competition for kids. I think it's Adam this year. And we start off with around 400 kids, and by the end of it, you're left with two kids who end up winning the whole thing. And for those two kids, they get to go to the All-Star game, all-inclusive trip that's paid for by the organization, and they get to actually represent the team there and recompete on behalf of the Canadians against kids who have won this competition from other teams. Right? We actually had a kid win it one year at the All-Star game. I'm pretty sure it was in Florida or Tampa one year, and that's the one that he won. Kid was unbelievable. So that's just like a little wrap up of some of the things we're doing. We actually have a big festival coming up on the weekend. I'll be working 25 hours in 2 days. And so those are kind of the work days when we are working the events. But I mean, it's really fun. You get to work with kids. And like I've had the privilege of seeing the Bell Center and the practice facility a bunch, but for kids who don't get to have that opportunity often, it's cool to see like their reactions, also the families' reactions when they get to see their kids play at the Bell Center, where, players that they consider their idols get to play multiple times a week. So it's really cool. We provide a lot back to the community, and that's the reason why I've enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I mean, as like a big sports fan, hockey fan myself, like it's cool to see those facilities at any age. Like my roommate and I, her family has access to season tickets for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and this past fall we went and did like an hour skate on like the Scotiabank Arena, and like as like 20 years old, I felt like a 10-year old like walking in. Like I go to those games, but it's so cool to like sit on the side and put your skates on and like skate around the ice and say like, oh, like that's where I normally sit, but like now I'm on like center ice. Like it's cool at any age. And like my dad at 69 right now, like he's like a kid in a candy store every time we go to a sports game because he loves all of it. So I'm sure that's a great experience to have when you're that young, for sure.
Well, yeah, for sure. And I think what's cool as well is, and I've also had the opportunity to visit the Ford Performance Center where the Leafs do practice. It's a very nice facility, and I think what's cool is us being in these positions as we study and we work in the industry, we get to provide experiences to our families as well. So after working about 12 hours on Saturday, I'll still have 13 hours left on Sunday, but at night on Saturday, we're playing our annual employee game. So we just, we usually rent the ice for an extra hour and a half, and then all the employees will get together. We'll all have an opportunity to bring a friend to the game and get to play with us. It's like we've been doing that now for like ever since I can remember, minus the 2 COVID years, right? And like it's just cool because then like my boss will be like, "Oh, invite your parents to come out and watch." So like my parents
Yeah.
can come to the Bell Center, sit wherever they want. They can sit like ice level. They can sit at like it's for them. It's cool because they get to like see a game when there's like not a million people there, right? So
Yeah.
it's like really cool to provide those experiences for the family as well, especially in my family where my dad grew up playing sports, especially hockey. So he was always a big hockey guy. My mom didn't really play sports, but between my sister and my sister played high level soccer. So she became the typical hockey mom, soccer mom. So yeah, they've been great with that, and it's cool to provide those experiences for them.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So obviously you've had some great experiences so far with Montreal, but could you expand on some of your past experiences while you were maybe in school and things you've done outside of the Montreal organization and how they've helped you in the sport industry today?
Yeah, so like I'm super involved with soccer as well. I was always a dual sport athlete, and for 3 years I worked at Champlain College, where I decided to spend my CEGEP career. So I've always stayed involved ever since. I spent 3 years now working as the director of soccer operations for the men's soccer program.
Hmm.
That's been a really cool experience to work with very high level student athletes, and then even most recently I had the opportunity to transition over to the women's side and work with the women's soccer team as we competed for a national championship this past season. So we finished silver medalists in all of Canada. We had a very good team. Unfortunately, we lost to another very good team, but just being around student athletes has been really fun because you get to have an impact on not just their athletic lifestyle, but also what they do in academics, right? And then it could even expand beyond that, depending on how close you are with your players, how comfortable they are around you. And I feel as though being, we'll say, a young person in that kind of environment has helped me out a lot in terms of forming those relationships and creating a safe environment for the players. So it's something I've really enjoyed. Other than that, I mean, I've had experience in other sports as well, but those are the most notable ones, hockey and soccer. And in terms of like the school, what I've noticed was just being as involved as I possibly can while I was a student helped out a lot. And I'm sure you both see that as well at Brock, where you probably have lots of opportunities based on how recognized the program is. And funny enough, I almost went to Brock. So when I was looking at university programs after finishing CJEP, Brock was one of the ones I was looking at. It's just I couldn't convince myself at the time to make that move from Montreal.
Yeah.
Which is funny because ever since then I've been wanting to move from Montreal. But no, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to actually taking the program seriously. I think in every program, you're always going to have students that maybe aren't super passionate about it or don't really know what they want yet. But for the ones who are, I think you should really, double down on what you like, because there's real opportunities for you to get ahead of everybody else in the industry.
No, for sure. Because I know it's been preached to us that over the years, you got to get involved, do this, any opportunity you can, volunteer, paid, any type of thing, get involved. And for me, myself and Maddie, it was hard first year being like it was one of the COVID years. So like this was a great, Being council was a great way to get involved. It was one of the stepping stones on how we both got involved in university. But like you preached, getting involved so big in your university life within any type of anything within the sport world.
And also, like, I think Jackson and I can both speak, and most people in our program too. Like, by third year, you can kind of tell, like, who's really in for it and who's like just here because they had to be or they thought it was cool. Like, you can kind of tell by third year, like, who's taking it seriously and who's like still doesn't know what they want to do, which is totally fine. But you can tell who wants to put all of their effort into it and who's just still trying to figure it out.
I think too, and if I'll just add this, I think what a lot of people have the misconception with the sport management programs is they have the mindset of, well, I like sports, I play sports, so I'll go into this program. But then you get into it and you realize, oh, there's like a lot more emphasis on the business side of things and the logistics. And I don't think a lot of people are super passionate about that, and that's completely fine, right? I think a lot of
Yeah.
people, you give them the opportunity. Like one story I know about a guy that I went to college with, in terms of the business side of things, he wasn't super passionate about it, but then he ended up opening up his own gym. So it's like he was more interested in like being hands-on with stuff. And then through that, he was able to like learn about the business side, because if you have your own gym, you need to
Yeah.
understand how the financials and all that stuff work, right? But in terms of the involvement, right? So I've graduated now from CJEP. It's been 4 years or so, right? I graduated in 2018, and I'm still involved, right? Because it's just like a very special place that has provided a lot of opportunities for me. I still go back and help out with game day operations for games that are not soccer anymore, just because I'm involved on staff. But I'll be at the basketball games, I'll be at the football games, and I think as students, that's a good opportunity. I'm sure Brock has the same thing where you're able to be on the game day staff, right? I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of students to build up their CVs doing that, because that's something that they can't take away from you after, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you get a sense of what it's like to be in that kind of environment. If you're surrounded by varsity teams, you get a sense of what it's like to be working with those kind of student athletes who are very high student athletes, right? So I think there are a lot of ways of getting involved. You just have to be able to do some research. And, you know, as Jackson said, if you're willing to do work for little to no money, chances are you're going to get ahead, because that is the biggest cheat code. And I know a lot of people can let their ego get in the way and say, why would I work for no money, right? But somebody else will. So that's what I've learned in the industry. Like, if you don't do it, somebody will. So you do want to be putting your best foot forward and trying to find as many opportunities as possible.
No, for sure. And then you quickly touched on like didn't do the move to Brock. Just wasn't ready. Wasn't the right fit for you at that moment in your life. So, what are your like future goals in the sport industry, and where do you see yourself in 5, 10 years?
Like an
So
interview question.
I know.
and I'm going to give the same question I've been giving in interviews as well, because I've done plenty of them recently. But and I know this is not like the most enjoyable answer, but I'm going to say I don't know, just because I've learned that whenever I do try to make plans, things just randomly changed
Yep.
and it's completely out of my control, right? Like you can try to plan out everything for the next 5 years of your life, and then one day you're going to wake up and something's completely different. So I think I've just enjoyed being in more of a flow state where I'm just enjoying each day, enjoying the actual experiences I have. And I think it's more about enjoying where I'm at versus constantly saying, "Oh, I want to get there. I want to get there." I think I was caught in that mindset for a little bit where I was always looking for the next thing, and I maybe lacked appreciation for what was actually happening, right?
Mhm.
And I think one thing actually that actually set me straight with um, my whole mindset on that was last year when Guy Lafleur passed away, right? Obviously, big Canadians legend, but
Yep.
also big NHL legend. I never understood the true magnitude of what the Montreal Canadiens had, but also if you're like one of the historic greats of the club, like what kind of weight that carries. And I was in the building the day he passed away, and I've never seen so much media attention and so much shift of attention like that quickly. Like we were doing something, and then people were telling us, "Oh yeah, we're changing up the entire schedule, the entire itinerary. We have to do this." Like it was unbelievable. And then even with the national funeral where it was open to the public, like I've never seen so many people be touched by one event. And it
Mhm.
really gave me the perspective of like, yes, you're a contractor. Yes, you're not working every single day for the Montreal Canadiens, but at the end of the day, you're representing them, and it's like a very big brand that's known all around the world. That means so much to so many people, and it's not only for the Canadians. Like I know a bunch of, especially the original six teams. Toronto probably carries the same weight, right? But I just that was my moment where I was like, I really need to start appreciating things more because you know 6 years ago I started working with the Habs. It's already been 6 years. It feels like it was yesterday. So,
Yep.
and it feels like just yesterday that I was participating in the camp. So everything's going by really quickly that I think everybody just needs to slow down a little bit and appreciate it, right? So to answer your question, I really don't know. But I do know that wherever it is, I'm going to do my best to make it work out. So,
No,
Yeah.
that's the mindset you have to have because I know, at, like you said, everything goes by so fast. Because I've even over the past like the winter break, I'm like, I have 3 semesters to go. I'm already way more than halfway done. I have 3 semesters to go, and I have to start looking for a full-time job in about a year. It's a little scary. It's kind of like, oh, I'm not too sure what I want to do yet, but I have like obviously ideas, but it's like, do I want to go this way, this way? How can I get myself in a better position? So I can definitely relate that we have no clue.
and I mean, just to touch on, so one thing that really keeps me in check with all of this, like I said, I've gone back to the college where I studied, right? And I work with the soccer teams. So now I'll be recruiting players who are telling me that they're 2005 borns that are 17 years old. And I remember being like a part of orientation day where you welcome the new students, and I'm just like I was sitting here like 7 years ago, and like I remember it.
Yeah.
So that's why for those kind of moments, especially working with the soccer teams at Champlain, it's really helped me like understand how quickly things went. Like 7 years ago, I was sitting there, and then within a 7 year window, all of this has happened in my career. But I also graduated college and
Yeah.
graduated university. I'm like, how did
Yeah.
that happen so quickly? So, yeah, I think it's just more about like really taking the time to enjoy every moment. That's what I've been trying to do for like very recently.
Yeah. And I think it's come up on like my social medias like so often recently, but it's like that one line that says like when 3 years ago was 2020 and not 2017. And then like you think about that and I'm like, whoa, like 2020 was 3 years ago? Like that's crazy to think about. But well, we've had some awesome chat here, an awesome chat here about the industry and how beneficial it can be. But we like to keep things fun and talk about like real life sports and hockey's a big one for sure. So we'll start off. I mean, we've talked about some of your experiences with the Montreal Canadiens and like bringing your family and having them experience that too. But what's one of the most like memorable experiences you have working with the Montreal Canadiens? Like, did you meet someone or was it an event? Like a little, you could have a little fangirl moment.
Um, so I have two actually. I was having a hard time choosing between them, so I'm like,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, I'll just talk about both. So the first is when I was obviously a fan when I was younger, right? There was like one game that's like always going to be famous for Montreal. It's like we were down 5-0 to the Rangers,
Mhm.
and then they ended up coming back and winning that game 6-5 in shootout. And I was at that game, and I remember just like I remember wanting to leave the game because I just wasn't having it. We were getting pumped at home to the Rangers, but I'm glad I stayed, right?
Yeah.
So that was just unbelievable because just you don't think those things can happen. You know, you're down 5-0 going like with like 10 minutes left in the second. You're just like, all right, it's just game's kind of over, and then they pull that off. And as a kid, as a fan, I was like going crazy, and so was the rest. Like I've never heard the Bell Center so loud.
Yeah.
And then obviously the second one, you know, not being directly involved with it, right? But just the Stanley Cup run 2 years ago was like nothing I've ever been a part of in my life. It was insane. Like the city, and unfortunately, the city was in lockdown, right? So
Yeah.
Montreal didn't get an opportunity to show to its fullest capacity what they were capable of doing in the stands and surrounding the building. But like downtown Montreal, outside the watch parties, like I've never seen anything like that. It was insane. Like after Lehkonen scored the game-winning goal, I had a buddy who was in the building, and there was only like 2,500 people allowed in the building. So he FaceTimes me from inside the building. Everybody's going crazy, right? And then all you hear on like the jumbotron is that like they're locking down the building because it's too chaotic outside, and they don't want to open any door and potentially let people inside the arena,
Yeah.
right? So, but it was obviously in a good way. But it was just like the vibe that summer in Montreal. It was nice. It was giving people something positive, right? Because
Yeah.
at that time, everything in the world was kind of like there was a lot of negativity, and it was a lot of like, you know, you couldn't really see people you loved. So that was a moment that brought a lot of people together, which I enjoyed.
Mhm.
I did get to participate in one of the watch parties downtown, and like I said, it was that that whole run was just insane. And then you know you lose to a team that's expected to win the cup that are stacked, right? But just being a part of like that whole process and just seeing what could happen, like it was really really special.
No, because I remember seeing like the watch parties on TV. And I remember me and a couple buddies back home, we actually joked about going to Montreal just for the watch party. None of us were Habs fans. We're like, we just kind of wanted to go out, and like we had the itch to go to something live, and we're like, that would be such a cool thing. We never ended up going because it was way too far of a drive, but we were like, that would have been so cool to go to. Like, but none of us are even Habs fans, but it was just like that. Like you could just tell everyone was having fun. Like it was
It
just,
was insane,
it was
man. It was
different.
just like in every round there was something memorable for me at least. Where yeah, first round with Toronto, I remember. Obviously, you're down 3-1, right? You come back from that. I'm sorry, Maddie. But I remember game 6 to push it to game 7 when Kotkaniemi scored the winner, right? I was up north at my best friend's cottage, and it was just like me and my two best friends. We just made like a great meal, and now we're just sitting down watching the game, and like being able to experience like an
Yeah.
overtime winner that sends it to game 7 with my two best friends. Like it was such a cool moment, and we were like isolated up north in the middle of a lockdown.
Yeah.
Just like after that, we were just like we went outside. We were like popping champagne. It was hilarious. Nobody up north. Nobody could hear us. Then you know in the second round, you know you sweep the Jets, and for whatever reason, it seemed as though every game we were watching during dinner. Like we would have my laptop set up on the table, and we would be watching it as a family. So I got to experience that whole second round, like surrounded by my family and watching that together. And you know that part of it was cool. And then obviously even just with Vegas, like I mentioned, that goal that Kotkaniemi
Yeah.
scored to send us to the Cup final. Like I remember that call. I remember that whole series. Just the buzz was different in the city because people were talking about, oh, like, all right, they're beating the teams in Canada, whatever. Wait until they play a team from the States, right? And then they go do that against Vegas, who at the time was a good team. And I'm just like, all right, we're here. Like, it's serious. So every round was just very special. Then even in the final, the only game we won, I remember being at work when Anderson scored in overtime, and just like we were already down the series like 3-0, and I knew we were probably going to lose the next game, but I was just like, we won a game in the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah.
I've never experienced that, right? Like it's a
Yeah.
really cool moment if you're supporting a team and you get to experience that. Like it's a really really cool moment. So I mean, look, Jackson, you've seen it a bunch with their wings, but whatever.
I mean, I was still pretty young when they were
Yeah.
doing all that type of stuff. So, and then we talked about the Stanley Cup. So I know it's early January. I know it's way too early, but what is your early Stanley Cup final prediction and champion?
I was thinking about this yesterday, and it was funny because I even told my friend who's a Bruins fan, and he doesn't believe in them, but I do, and I'm a Habs fan. I do think the Bruins will be there, and I do think the Jets will be there.
Yeah.
And I think the Bruins will beat the Jets in the final. I don't know in how many games. I just think both teams have great goaltenders. Um, I think the team defense for Boston's a little better. I was looking at the stats yesterday. They're the only team in the league that hasn't conceded 100 goals yet, and it's like they're not even close. It's like in the 80s or like low 80s. And then just offensively, they're so deep, right? They have a superstar top line with a couple of superstars, right, with Marchand and Pasternak. So I think they're really good. I think the Jets, coming off of like 2 tough years, they get swept and then they don't make the playoffs. I think Hellebuck is good enough to win them a
Oh
series.
yeah.
He's really, really good. And I think the rest of that team is coming together. They're very well coached, right, by Bonus. So I think that could be a good one. Dallas is always a good team. I think if Colorado can get healthy, they can maybe do something again, but they're a little shaky in goal. So there's a lot of potential teams, right? I think if New York starts rolling, the Rangers, I think they can be dangerous. But I just think based off of what I've seen so far, Boston just looks the best in the league right now. They're the most well-rounded team. And look, I think the Jets they're riding the momentum right now. They're doing really well based on the fact that they're coming off 2 tough seasons, and with a new coach, it's come together very well, very quickly. So I think those are 2 teams that we might see in the final.
No, for sure. And you touched on because I think Colorado's going to get healthy and then go on a run in the West. I live with an Avalanche fan as well, so he'll be pretty pumped when he hears that. And then I think the Rangers will. I said they were from the beginning of the season they were my team coming out of the East. So Maddie, who do you have the Leafs facing in the final?
I was just gonna say Leafs all the way.
We already know who's coming out of the East with the Leafs. So who's your Western Conference team?
I don't know. I just not Boston, not Montreal. We're just Leafs all the way.
It doesn't look like Montreal will be in the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
The reason why I took Boston is because they'll probably knock out the Leafs on the way, right? As per usual. The other team that I was like looking at, but I cannot convince myself yet, is Edmonton. I just can't convince myself yet.
No.
I think McDavid is so like it doesn't make sense what I'm watching, but the rest of like the team just isn't. It's not enough, which sounds crazy, but it's just not enough. Yeah. And I think it makes such a difference. I think the goaltending is still shaky. So, because the reality is, if you're going into a series against the Jets are more complete as a team and have better goaltending. So I take the Jets there, right? I think the same thing with Colorado. I think the same thing with others. Same thing with Dallas. So, yeah, I just have a hard time going with Edmonton. But McDavid and Draisaitl are ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, good segue there. Just coming off of the World Juniors. Last question to close it off. Who do you believe is the better prospect when entering the draft, Connor Bedard or Connor McDavid?
I'm still gonna go McDavid. I think what we're seeing from Bedard is crazy, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of recency bias, right? Like I remember the hype around McDavid when I was in high school, and it's just what he was doing was like he was being looked at when he was like 12 years old, 13 years old.
Yeah.
And then he goes to the juniors putting up crazy numbers. I understand that he wasn't as polarizing in the World Juniors as Bedard was.
Right.
But at the same time, I just think that Canada team had a lot more than this current Canada. And yes, they still won. But I think there was a lot more mouths to feed on that Canada team. Plus, you had a couple guys come down from the NHL that year, and Domi, Duclair, Reinhardt. That first line was ridiculous, right? So there was no real opportunity for him to be your guy. Whereas I feel like they really leaned on Bedard this year. They gave him, carte blanche to do whatever he wanted to and be like, go have fun. And he did. And you saw how unreal he was. And even what he's doing with Regina is disgusting. But at the same time, too, I'm kind of disappointed that he didn't get traded from Regina because now he's stuck on a team that's not so great, that is struggling to even be in a playoff position. And I think it would be a real shame if they don't make the playoffs because you're kind of being robbed from seeing a player like that compete in the CHL playoffs, which I think he can make a big difference, right? I think we've seen it a lot where the lower seeds go on runs because they have a hot goaltender or they just have somebody who's going off. And I think he could be one of those guys. So I do hope Regina gets into the playoffs because they can make some noise. But I think a lot of it is recency bias because I just think what we're seeing with McDavid and how well it's translated, like it's no accident. Like we knew that was going to happen when he was in juniors, and that's because he was so highly touted. I think there's a lot of questions with Bedard's size. I wish we would get away from that, but the reality is, I don't think
It's
we
there.
will. It's just there, right? Like he's a small kid. He's unbelievable. He's unbelievably talented. He makes defenders look like they're not at the same level. But it's just McDavid fits your, he fits what it is to be a superstar player, and I think Bedard will as well. But I do think it might take a little more time to really settle in. So
Yeah.
I do go McDavid. Again, a lot of the Bedard stuff is recency bias, but it's not discrediting anything he's doing, because even what he's doing is just, it's ridiculous.
I did see a tweet like during the World Juniors, and I think it was somebody said to like Connor McDavid, like what advice would you give to Bedard right now or something, and he said like looks like he's got it all covered. Like he doesn't need to hear from me, but he's a pretty humble kid, and like that's what I liked about him. Especially like everybody probably saw it in the last game when the reporter was like, "Well, you've broken so many records." He just cut her off. He was like,
Yeah.
"No, like my team just won gold. I don't want to talk about what I did this tournament," and I think that's pretty humble. So
I think it's going to be interesting to see how that transitions now to the NHL, right?
yeah,
Because my thing, and I feel like it's really hard, especially being around a pro environment now for 6 years. Like there's been so many like I'm not saying they're on that level, but even just first round picks and first overall picks, like yeah, all those guys were nasty in junior. Now what do they do in the NHL? That's why I always
yeah,
really wait to see what happens. Because look, I've seen a lot of situations. I've played with some guys that were putting up over 100 points in the juniors,
yeah,
and some of them never even got drafted, right? Like one of the nastiest players I've ever played with, and people probably don't even know who he is, but his name's Philippe Sanche. He played in the queue for Blainville, which is a team closer to where I am. In his last year of junior, he put up 125 points, never got drafted because he was like 5'6".
Yeah.
And he
yeah,
captains Concordia University, and like he was nasty in university hockey as well for U Sports. But it's just like there's been so many good players that it just doesn't transition. So that's why I'm really curious to see how that does transition. I think environment and his landing spot makes a big difference. I think if he ends up in Arizona, it's a good. I do believe it's a good spot, because then I do think they will make the push for Matthews. And I think Arizona could be really well set up in the next few years. I do feel that with the prospect pool that they have and the changes that they are making organizationally, they could be in a good spot like a decade from now.
yeah. Well, we've had an awesome chat here today. Good one to start off 2023. So I want to thank you for joining us on behalf of Jackson and I and the SPEMA Council podcast. And we'll give you the floor to close it off. But any final words? And thanks for joining us.
For final words, for students specifically, right? Because I think that's the target here. I think for students, what I would focus on is just being kind to a lot of people, right? Obviously, everybody you meet, you should be kind to them, because the amount of times I've been in situations where somebody knows somebody that I know, it's just like not only the hockey world, but the sports world is so small, right? And connections and references mean so much in this industry. So I think it's just making sure that you're always kind to people. And then to go back on our point when we were talking about the whole, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I would just encourage people not to rush things. Like whatever is meant to happen will happen. And it's hard to not to question why things are happening or why they're not happening, right? But chances are that they are happening for a specific reason. It just may not be evident yet, right? So I would really focus on slowing things down, not trying to rush everything, not setting these timelines in your head where you're saying, if I don't do this by this age, I'm a failure. Because like the reality is that like people peak at certain ages, or people have lucky landing spots or whatever it could be. It's just everybody's on a different path, right? And I don't think we should compare ourselves to other people. Yes, we can acknowledge what other people in the industry have done, right? But I think everybody has their own path, and I think it's important to like appreciate what you're actually doing, because a lot of the stuff that we get to do in the industry is very, very cool, and we shouldn't take it for granted, right? That's something I'm really focusing on now, where I'm getting a lot of cool experiences, especially with the Canadians, but also with a lot of the other stuff that I'm doing. And you have to appreciate that. You have to actually like look back and say like, wow, like 7 years ago, none of this was even a thing. And
Mm-hmm.
within 7 years, I was able to make all of those things happen. And I think even for both of you and a lot of the students that you go to school with, I think it's important to even just take a second, even now, at whatever age you are, and just recognize what you've already done. Like, even though you're not done university, take a second to really appreciate what's happened so far, and then ask yourself, like, wow, I can't wait to see, like, where I am in 5 years, right? I do that a lot with my friends where we talk about it. We're like, wow, 5, 10 years from now, like, I can't wait to see what our lives look like.
Yeah.
No, for sure.
Yeah, I think those are some pretty good closing words. I don't know if you have any as well or any questions, but if not, I really, really appreciate both of you having me on, and it's been really cool to chat and connect with both of you.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.